feel honored and yet challenged as I try to give to you, but especially to his grandchildren, and hopefully for his great-grandchildren, a feel of who he really was. Some people called him James. A lot of people called him JH or Jim. His children and grandchildren called him Dad or Grandpa G. His mother called him June, which was actually his given name. He was born on June 1st, 1921. However, over time, he decided that sounded like a girl's name, and so he had it changed officially in 1960 to James. James Hewlett Gardner. Sounds very formal, but he was not a bit. He was born in a log cabin in the Meadow Creek area near Sublette, Idaho, in the southwestern corner of Idaho, in the Raft River Valley. Dad often referred to this area as the cold wind center of North America. His parents were Frederick Gardner and Hope Hewlett, and he was the first child of 8, 7 who grew to adulthood, and 4 who are still alive and here today. And it's so wonderful to see them and I'm thankful for all of you that were able to come today. The family soon moved to the Bridge area in Malta, where they lived in a sheep wagon on a piece of property which they homesteaded. James and Golden were little, and Mary was a baby then. And they lived with 3 small children and 2 adults in this sheep wagon. Soon they rented a house near Malta that belonged to Willis Sears. They had no running water there, no electricity, and they had to carry most of their water they used from a neighbor's well. Well, they had received a little, James and Golden, who were 5 and 3.5 at the time, had a little express wagon from their grandparents. And in it they had a 5-gallon milk can that they used to haul the water for their mother. Their mother said that they were always so willing to help any way that they could. At the Sears place, one of the things they did was raise chickens. And this is where the story of Soretop took place. It's one of the family favorites. In 1929, when Dad was 8, the family moved to the Malta home where they remained. And by the way, if I have any mistakes here, and the family can correct me afterwards, I'm sure that as I was looking through the different stories, I realized that not all the histories agreed. Dad was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by his father in the middle fork of Cassia Creek that runs through the backyard near their house. Growing up on the farm gave Dad plenty of opportunity to work. After school was out for the day or for the summer, there were fences to be mended, livestock to be found, irrigation to be tended to, crops planted, and more, cows to be milked. After dinner, he did his homework by the kerosene lamp, and while he lived his home, his family never had electricity or indoor plumbing. During this summer, he worked 10-hour days driving a dairy course for $1 a day. He used the money to buy necessities for himself and for his family, and he said there was rarely any money left at the end of the summer. But he said about those days, he said, "I would not trade those days for anything." Dad always said that his life was rich with love and experiences. He was a master storyteller, and growing up on a farm gave him plenty of material. We loved his stories, and he told them often at dinner time. It was a very useful tool for keeping peace in a large family. In 1940, Dad was 19 years old. The church was sending out very few missionaries in those years because World War II had started, and there wasn't a lot of money because the Depression was just ending, and so he was not able to go on a mission, something he always regretted. Dad left home to find a job, someplace that they would hire him, and he ended up in Southern California working for Lockheed, making planes. At a church fireside, he met Elaine Scholl, and he married her in May of 1943. He was drafted into the U.S. Navy in September, and he was stationed at Treasure Island in the San Francisco Bay, where he taught classes in radar and radio for the duration of the war. At the end of World War II, Elaine and J.H. moved to Providence, Utah, to go to school where he received a master's degree in sociology. After the war, his family grew. Kent was born in Los Angeles. I was born in Farmington, Utah. And then the family moved permanently to Southern California to stay, and Mark, Janice, Gail, Jeffrey, and Julie were born. Dad lived here in Glendale for 57 years. In 1960, when Dad was 39 years old, and he had 7 children, Kent was the oldest at 14, and Julie was the youngest at 2, his sweetheart Elaine died. Dad soon met and married Carol Thompson, who had never been married before, and she took care of 7 children. JT came along soon to make it an even 8. It was hard for Carol, who worked tirelessly to get up to speed on dealing with the demands of a large family. Dad loved his family, and he served them, but the best thing he ever did was to choose wisely in marriage and give us 2 wonderful mothers. Dad loved his children and grandchildren. Beth Frost tells this story about when Julie was a baby. She was number 7. And I want to thank K. Don Frost for this story he got from his mother. She tells it. She says the Scouts had gone on a ward camp out. The troop was up on an overnight camp out in Angeles Crest National Forest. Parents of the Scouts were invited to attend a campfire with the boys before they headed home. Dad and Mother invited Beth to go with them because her husband, who was the scoutmaster, and her son were already at camp. Beth had never learned to drive a car, so she gratefully accepted their invitation. Dad and Mother brought baby Julie on the trip, and on the way home, the baby began to cry. Elaine tried to comfort her and distract her with a rattle or some other toy, but the crying continued. She changed her diaper and tried to feed her, but the crying only increased. She tried to burp baby Julie, thinking that perhaps the crying was caused by gas. Still, Julie cried, and Mother Elaine became more and more frustrated. She had just run out of things to try to still the crying when Beth remembered her turning to Jim and saying, "What am I going to do with her?" Jim's reply was, "Just love her." He pulled the car over to the side of the road, got out, walked over to her side of the car, opened the door, and took his crying daughter in his arms. And then he walked around beside the car, gently bouncing her up and down as he rubbed her back. In a short time, the intense crying turned into whimpers, and finally their baby daughter was still. Jim then returned Julie to Elaine's arms, and Beth says we made it all the way home without even another whimper. Dad always loved to hold the little babies, and he could always quiet them. Dad took us to Malta for vacation almost every year of our growing up years. As city kids, we loved going to visit Dad's parents in the farm. We could explore the house, the barn, the granary, the fields, etc. And in the early days, when Grandpa Fred Gardner was alive, we would watch him bring the cows to the barn and milk them. Grandma Hope's cooking was always a treat. We went out to shoot rabbits that were pests in the area from a pickup at night because they would sit perfectly still in the light from the truck. The highlight of the trip was a campfire in the yard with Golden and his family and aunts and uncles. I'm not sure our parents enjoyed those trips, but we loved them. Dad believed that teenagers should have challenging experiences in life. Once, he and Jeff hiked 75 miles around the Raft River Valley surrounding Malta. In 1978, he and JT biked from Whittier to San Diego, a trip of 110 miles. But apparently that wasn't challenging enough for JT. So in 1979, they did it again and made it a round trip so they could go 220 miles. JT relates this memory from the 1979 trip. It was a Monday, the day after Fast Sunday. We were within 20 miles north of Sandy's place. That's when we lived in San Diego. Probably in Del Mar and Encinitas, and we stopped for a water break. Dad sat down next to a guardrail and promptly fell asleep. He woke up in a minute or two laughing in himself, thinking that passers-by in the cars would look at the scene and think, that poor teenager standing next to a dead middle-aged man. Dad worked for NBC, keeping their machines running. He also helped as NBC developed color television. Along with other NBC employees, he was able to travel to China in 1972 to provide TV coverage for when President Nixon visited there. Dad could fix anything electronic. People would often bring their TVs, their computers, their VCRs, etc., and he would fix them and give them back and occasionally charge for parts. Kent remembered when Dad would go on a vacation and arrive at his destination, he would ask, "What can I fix?" His mother once told him, "Nothing." He said, "Okay, then I'm going home." Once during a Christmas visit to the Langlois, Julie's family, Cliff mentioned a problem with his roof. Big mistake. In spite of being Christmas Eve, soon Dad was on the roof, tearing it apart and covering the patio with falling roofing material. If something needed to be done, he was going to help. Dad had lots of interest. He loved to print photos with his darkroom equipment. He loved to ride his bike to work. He loved to read. He spent many hours in these last couple years as he's been sick listening to books on tape. And reading, I think, was one of the things he did to relax and recharge his batteries. Late Saturday afternoons, JT said you usually found him on the couch reading and either preparing his Sunday school lesson or reading just for the fun of it. And I think most of his children have and also have that same love. Serving in the church and serving others was very important to him. He taught the Family Relations Adult Sunday School class here for about 14 years and was an excellent teacher. I still remember some of his lessons. Many years ago, when I was about 3 or 4, I was going down the street and I was being pulled in our little red wagon, and the wagon handle got dropped. It went out in the street and I ended up on my head in the middle of the street. And I can remember my dad coming over, picking me up, carrying me home, taking me to the hospital to get stitches. It felt so good to be carried. I can remember how good that felt. To be held in his strong arms. He was so strong. Those strongs have always been there to steady me throughout my life. I will miss you, Dad. Thank you for your example. It will continue to inspire your children, grandchildren, and others. Thank you for your testimony and service to the church. Thank you for showing us how to work and never give up. Thank you for your stories. I will always remember them. Dad, you are loved and cherished by your wives, children, and grandchildren. Truly, you are a rich man. Thank you, Dad. We love you. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
I knew I should have spoken first. But I am very pleased today to be able to share with you my assignment is to tell you why James Hewlett Gardner was a great man. And it's a very, very easy subject to speak on. And I know he would be thrilled with the congregation that is here to honor him. And he dearly loves everyone in this room, and he would want me to tell you that. And he would also want me to thank you for being here, because for some of you, it took great effort. Many of his brothers and sisters flew in this morning from Utah, and some came from Idaho, and he appreciates the effort that you made. Now, JH had 31 grandchildren and 25, almost 26 great-grandchildren. And almost all of the grandchildren are here, and many of the great-grandchildren. As I was preparing to give this talk, I contacted my brothers and sisters and some of the grandkids and asked them what they remembered about Dad and Grandpa Gardner and what made him such a great person. So today I'm going to share a few of my thoughts and a few of the thoughts that my brothers and sisters and some of the grandkids shared with me. And some of it will be very similar to what Sandy shared, but maybe just looking at it from a little different perspective. But Dad was very proud of his good family. On his birthday or Father's Day or Christmas, if you ever asked Dad what gift he wanted, the answer was always the same. It never varied. He wanted good kids. And Dad was not demonstrative by nature, but he loved us all the same. And he showed us love in lots of different ways. And I have one very simple example that I want to share. And that was from JT. And JT, when he was young, he loved trains. And JT remembers, and I quote, "Dad was not a time waster, but I remember a few times where he and I were in the car and he saw a train a little ways off. And he slowed down so that we would have to stop while the train passed so I could watch the train. Luckily for him at that time, the Southern Pacific always ran full speed